cameras, with notepads, with medical kits, with letters bearing the seal of the Vatican itself. Prove I was lying. And for 50 years they could not. 50 years of investigations. 50 years of physicians pressing their fingers into wounds that would not close, would not infect, would not behave the way every law of biology said they should. 50 years of the most powerful institution in human history pointing its full weight at one barefoot friar in southern Italy and walking away without an answer. They called me a mystic. They called me a fraud. One Vatican official put it in writing, called me an ignorant and self-mutilating psychopath. That document is real. It's circulated in Rome for years. But here is the question that document never answered. How do you fake wounds that bleed from the inside out in front of thousands of witnesses for half a century and never once get caught? Tonight, you will hear both sides of that question. Every piece of evidence, every medical report, every secret the Vatican kept locked in its archives for decades. And at the end, the judgment is yours. If truth is the only thing worth fighting for, you already know where you belong. Stay with me. My name is Francesco Forgione, but the world knows me by another name. The name they gave me the day I put on the brown robe of the Capuchin friars at 15 years old and never took it off again. Padre Pio. I was born in 1887, in a village so small most maps did not bother to include it. Pietrelcina, in the south of Italy. My father was a farmer who twice sailed to America to earn enough money to keep our family from starving. My mother prayed before the sun rose and after it set. We had nothing that the world considers valuable. No wealth, no influence, no name that opened doors in Rome.
God,
I was,
give me strength.
by every measure, nobody. And perhaps that is the most important thing I can tell you before we go any further. Because the story you are about to hear did not happen to a pope. It did not happen to a cardinal, or a bishop, or a man with powerful friends in high places who could protect him from scrutiny. It happened to a barefoot friar in a monastery at the edge of the world, a friar who spent up to 16 hours a day in a confessional, who slept, some nights, no more than 2 hours, who ate almost nothing, documented by the physicians who monitored him, and yet sustained a physical workload that younger, healthier men could not match. I arrived at the monastery of San Giovanni Rotondo in 1916. I never left. Not because I was forbidden to the later. For a time, I was restricted. But because I had no desire to be anywhere else. The world outside those walls held nothing I was searching for. What I was searching for was already there. In the silence before dawn, in the faces of the people who came to confess, in the chapel where, on the morning of September 20th, 1918 alone, kneeling, after Mass everything changed. I looked down at my hands, and I understood that my life, whatever privacy, whatever obscurity I had hoped for, was over.
Now, I wait.
Let me tell you what the investigators never put in their reports. They documented the wounds. They measured them. They photographed them. They wrote about them in language so clinical, so deliberately cold, that you could read 20 pages of their findings and never once feel the weight of what they were actually describing.
God.
A man,
My chest.
bleeding, every day,
Help me.
for 50 years. They did not write about what it looked like to stand at the altar on a Friday morning when the bleeding was at its heaviest and still lift your hands to consecrate the Eucharist.
Hear my prayer.
They did not write about the people in the pews who watched that happen and wept without knowing why. They did not interview the witnesses. And there were thousands of them. Pilgrims came from across Italy, from France, from America, from countries where the name San Giovanni Rotondo meant nothing until it meant everything. They came on foot. They came by train. They slept outside the monastery walls in the cold just to attend my morning mass, a mass that sometimes lasted 4 hours because they said something happened inside the chapel that they could not explain and could not stop thinking about afterward. These were not hysterical peasants hungry for miracles. Among them were physicians, university professors, military commanders, journalists trained to disbelieve everything they could not verify. A future prime minister of Italy sat in those pews. They arrived as skeptics. They left signing their names to testimonies they knew would invite ridicule. What did they witness? Wounds in the center of both palms, both feet, the left side of the chest, open, bleeding, consistent, present every single week for 5 decades, producing, on medical examination, approximately 1 cup of blood per day from each wound site.
This is what he left us.
Drive, Luigi Romanelli, chief physician of the hospital in Barletta, dispatched by the Archbishop specifically to investigate. A man with no interest in supernatural conclusions examined me 5 separate times between 1919 and 1920.
Texture.
He submitted his findings in writing. His conclusion: the wounds show no inflammation, no infection, no tissue deterioration. The edges remain clean and defined. This presentation is not consistent with any pathological condition known to medical science. A wound that bleeds daily for 50 years should have produced catastrophic sepsis within weeks. The surrounding tissue should have broken down. The bone should have become involved. None of that happened. And then there was the detail that even the most skeptical reports mentioned almost reluctantly in their final paragraphs: the scent. Witnesses who came close during bleeding episodes described the same thing, independently, across decades, a fragrance rising from the wounds themselves. Not the metallic sharpness of blood. Something else entirely. Roses, violets, fresh incense. You can dismiss 1 witness who says this. You can dismiss 10. When thousands say it across 50 years independently without coordination, what exactly are you dismissing? If this is the first time you are hearing this story the way it actually happened, this channel exists for exactly that reason. Subscribe only if truth, told without compromise, is something you still believe the world needs. There is something I need you to understand about the nature of these wounds, something the medical reports captured in data but could never capture in truth. The investigators who came to San Giovanni Rotondo all arrived with the same assumption: that I was doing something. Applying a chemical between examinations. using a tool in secret, reopening the wounds myself, in the hours when no one was watching, to maintain the appearance of something I had manufactured. It was a reasonable assumption. I do not fault them for making it. But here is what that assumption requires you to believe. It requires you to believe that I maintained this deception without a single slip, without a single witness catching me in the act for 50 years. In a monastery where I was never truly alone, where friars lived and prayed in close quarters around me at every hour, where investigators arrived without warning, where my cell was searched repeatedly, where my correspondence was opened and read by Vatican officials before it reached its recipients, where, at certain points, I was forbidden from saying public Mass, forbidden from hearing confessions, forbidden from writing letters, all while being watched by men whose entire purpose was to find the moment I slept. And still, the wounds remained. Drive. Georgi of Festina, surgeon. Sent in 1920. Another man of science with no patience for sentimentality attempted to resolve the question definitively. He dressed and bandaged the wounds himself, under fully controlled conditions. He sealed the bandages with his own hands. He documented everything. He returned days later to examine them. The wounds beneath the bandages were unchanged. No signs of interference. No evidence of chemical application. No deterioration consistent with self-infliction. The tissue, in his written assessment, remained inexplicably stable. 50 years. Thousands of witnesses.
I have looked through every
multiple
page.
independent medical examinations. Zero evidence of fraud ever physically documented at the wound sites themselves. And then there were the other phenomena, the ones I speak of carefully, because I know how they sound to a mind trained to require evidence before belief. The biolocation accounts, dozens of them, documented, verified by witnesses on both ends of the encounter. A general during the Second World War reported that a friar in a brown capuchin robe appeared to him on the front lines in North Africa, spoke to him, told him to turn his regiment back from the road ahead. Hours later, that road was destroyed by enemy fire. When shown photographs afterward, the general identified me without hesitation. I was in my monastery cell when it happened. I have no explanation to offer you. I only tell you the testimony exists. The general signed his name to it, and no one has ever successfully argued he was lying. I wanted to return, though, to something simpler, to the pain itself. Because no investigator in 50 years ever sat across from me and asked the one question that mattered most. What does it feel like? Every Friday, without exception, the wounds would intensify, the bleeding would increase, and I would experience, not metaphorically, not symbolically, but in my physical body, something I can only describe as weight.
It's too much.
A pressure from every direction simultaneously, as if the air itself had become solid and was pressing inward. I did not perform that. No one performs pain for 50 years without a single moment of relief, a single confession, a single crack in the story. But wait. There is something the Vatican's investigators found buried in their own archives, locked away for decades. not released to the public until long after I was gone, that even I cannot dismiss easily. It does not disprove the wounds, but it asks a question about their origin that is far more uncomfortable than anything my critics ever said publicly. It involves a letter, written in my own handwriting, mentioning carbolic acid, a letter the Church did not want you to read and for years succeeded in keeping from you. Everything I have told you was true. The witnesses were real. The medical reports were real. The 50 years were real. But so is this. In 1919, a Vatican official named Father Agostino Gemelli came to San Giovanni Rotondo. He was not a simple priest. He was a physician, a psychologist, the founder of what would become the Catholic University of Milan, one of the most credible scientific minds the Church had access to at the time. He examined me once. Briefly. I did not cooperate fully with his examination, and I will not pretend otherwise. There were reasons for that which I carried privately. But Gemelli left and wrote his assessment regardless. He concluded I was a self-mutilating hysteric.
Must be written.
That
no
report traveled to Rome, and it planted a seed of doubt that no subsequent investigation ever fully uprooted. But here is where I must stop defending myself and start asking the harder question.
Do you have faith in
Because buried in the Vatican archives, in a file that was not made available to researchers until decades after my death, there is a letter. It was written by me. In 1918, the same year the Stigmata appeared, I wrote to my spiritual director, Padre Agostino of San Marco in Lamis, requesting a specific substance, carbolic acid. I described it as something I needed to sterilize needles. A practical, medical explanation, entirely unremarkable on its own. Except, carbolic acid applied repeatedly and with concentration to human skin produces chemical burns that present, to visual examination, as open, defined wounds. Wounds that resist normal healing. Wounds that can be maintained reopened without surgical tools. The letter exists. It is not disputed. Historians who have examined the original document confirm its authenticity. And when Vatican investigators in the 1920s became aware of it, the official posture toward me changed quietly, but unmistakably. I was restricted. My public ministry was suspended. My correspondence was monitored. Not because the Church announced I was a fraud, but because powerful men in Rome were no longer certain I was not. There is a second document. A report filed by a Vatican envoy named Raffaello Carlo Rossi, sent to San Giovanni Rotondo in 1921 with direct authority from the Holy Office, the office historically responsible for investigating matters of heresy and deception. Rossi was thorough. He interviewed the friars. He examined the wounds. He reviewed the testimony of the physicians. His private conclusion, submitted under seal to Rome. The wounds showed characteristics consistent with superficial lesions, not the deep, penetrating wounds associated with historical descriptions of stigmata. Superficial. Maintained. Possibly, and he used this word carefully, assisted. Holy Office, Vatican, Archives, 1921 that report was locked away. The public was told nothing, and I continued my ministry, watched, restricted, investigated while Rome sat on evidence it did not know how to act on without destroying something millions of people had already built their faith around. Now, I am not telling you this to condemn myself. I am telling you this because the question deserves to be asked honestly in the same voice, with the same weight as every miracle testimony you heard in the previous hour. If the wounds were real, why did I need carbolic acid? If the wounds were supernatural, why did a Vatican envoy describe them as superficial? And if the answer to both questions is innocent, why did Rome keep the documents hidden for 50 years? If you have stayed this far, you already understand why this story has never been told this way before. Share this with one person who still believes the truth is worth the discomfort. That is the only subscription that matters. Let me ask you something. If you wanted to fake stigmata, truly fake them, over a long period of time, in a way that could withstand repeated medical examination, what would you need? You would need a substance that creates defined, open wounds without producing the infection patterns that surgical wounds produce. You would need access to that substance without drawing attention to the request. You would need a community around you that was predisposed to interpret what they saw as miraculous rather than medical. And you would need, above everything else, time. 50 years is a long time. But it is also, if you consider it from a different angle, exactly how long a careful person would need to make something permanent feel inevitable. I am not saying this is what happened. I am saying the architecture exists. The letter exists. The Vatican report exists. And the question those documents raise has never received a satisfying answer from anyone on either side of this debate. There is something else the defenders of my sanctity rarely discuss openly. The wounds disappeared 3 days before I died on September 20th, 1968. Exactly 50 years to the day after they first appeared, the stigmata began to close. By the time I died on September 23rd, the wounds were gone. Not scoured. Not healed in the way that wounds normally heal, with the discoloration, the tissue reformation, the evidence that something was once there. Gone. As if they had never existed. Physicians who examined my body immediately after death confirmed this. The skin where the wounds had been for 50 years was smooth.
Impossible.
Clean. Without a single mark. The believers say this was the final miracle, the wounds given and then taken back as a sign of completion. The skeptics say something else entirely. They say the wounds maintained artificially, chemically would, upon the cessation of that maintenance, close and clear fast to the natural wounds. That the absence of scarring is not evidence of the miraculous. It is evidence of the superficial. That the clean skin on my hands after death is not a final blessing. It is the last piece of a 50-year answer. But there is one document that neither side has ever been able to fully explain away. Not the believers. Not the skeptics.
No!
A document that does not exist in the Vatican archives because the Vatican did not produce it. It was written by a secular Italian magistrate. A man with no theological stake in the outcome. a man appointed by the Italian government, not the church, to investigate reports of fraud surrounding the hospital I founded with donated money. His investigation was not about the wounds. It was about the finances. And in the course of that investigation, which concluded I had committed no financial wrongdoing, he interviewed over 200 witnesses about what they had personally observed in San Giovanni Rotondo over 5 decades. What he found in those testimonies was not what he expected to find. And what he wrote in his final report is what you need to hear before you make your decision tonight. What the magistrate found was pattern, not the pattern of coordinated religious devotion, not the pattern of people telling each other what they wanted to hear and rehearsing it until it sounded credible. The pattern of independent accounts separated by years, by nationality, by language, by level of education, describing the same specific details without access to each other's testimony. The scent, the duration, the fraudy intensification, the quality of the light in the chapel during Mass, the expression on my face during the moments of greatest pain. Details that a fraud would have no reason to choreograph because they were not the details that made headlines. They were not the details that appeared in newspaper accounts or devotional pamphlets. They were the small, specific, unglamorous details that only a witness present in the room would think to notice. And 200 of them noticed the same things. Now, I have spent this entire night presenting you with 2 versions of the same life. Version 1, a man chosen by God to carry the wounds of Christ for 50 years, witnessed by thousands, verified by physicians who could not explain what they examined, sustained through half a century of surveillance and restriction without a single moment of exposure. Version 2, a deeply devout, possibly disturbed man who used carbolic acid to create wounds that took on a life of their own, wounds that a credulous community interpreted as miraculous, that a politically cautious church could neither fully endorse nor safely destroy, that became so embedded in the faith of millions that the truth, whatever it was, became impossible to speak aloud. Both versions are supported by real documents. Both versions have been argued by serious people with serious credentials. And here is what the historical record actually shows, the baseline that neither version can erase. The wounds of the stigmata, as a phenomenon, were documented as early as Saint Francis of Assisi in 1224. The Church has recognized stigmata in over 50 individuals across 8 centuries. The physical mechanism, wounds appearing on a human body in correspondence with the crucifixion sites, has never been reproduced in a laboratory. It has never been satisfactorily explained by any single medical framework. And it has never been definitively proven fraudulent in any case where the subject was subjected to the level of scrutiny I endured. What the record shows is not a verdict on me specifically. What it shows is the persistent, 800-year presence of something that does not fit cleanly into either the category of miracle or the category of fraud, and has resisted every attempt to force it into either one. I was canonized a saint on June 16, 2002. The ceremony was attended by 300,000 people. The Vatican, which had once called me a self-mutilating psychopath, declared that I had performed verified miracles, including the healing of a child with meningitis who recovered fully and inexplicably after her family prayed to me. The same institution that locked away the Rossi report. The same institution that suspended my ministry. The same institution that monitored my correspondence for decades. They put me on the calendar of saints. Make of that what you will. Because I have made my peace with the contradiction. I lived inside it for 50 years. I bled inside it, whether that blood came from heaven or from a bottle of carbolic acid or from something in between that human language does not yet have a word for. I only know what I felt in that chapel on the morning of September 20th, 1918. I only know what I felt every Friday for 50 years. And I know that when the wounds finally closed 3 days before I died, I felt something leave my body that had been there so long I had forgotten what it was like to exist without it. Whether you call that grace or psychology or the end of a very long deception, I leave entirely to you. Everything you heard tonight draws from the medical reports of Drive, Luigi Romanelli, Archdiocese of Foggia, 1919 to 1920, the Apostolic Visitation Report of Raffaello Carlo Rossi, Vatican Holy Office Archives, 1921, the published findings of Drive, Giorgio Festa, 1920, historical records of the Stigmata phenomenon documented by the Vatican Congregation for the Causes of Saints and the canonization proceedings of Pope John Paul II, June 16, 2002. Full sources and reading list are in the description below. If tonight changed something in the way you think about faith, about evidence, about the space between what we can prove and what we choose to believe, share this video with someone who is still searching. Not to convince them, just to give them the question. That is all any of us can do. You have heard both sides now. Not the sanitized version. Not the version the devotional pamphlets tell. Not the version the skeptical documentaries tell either, where the conclusion is decided before the evidence is examined. You heard the wounds that 50 years of Vatican investigation could not explain away. And you heard the letter, the carbolic acid, the report that Rome locked in a vault and did not open for decades. You heard what 200 independent witnesses agreed on in details too small and too specific to have been coordinated. And you heard what a Vatican envoy wrote privately, under seal, when he believed no one outside Rome would ever read it. Now it is your turn. Not to believe what I believe. Not to conclude what the Church concluded, or what the skeptics concluded, or what any voice of authority has told you to conclude. Your turn. Your judgment. Your verdict. This is what I have always wanted from the first morning I stood at that altar with bleeding hands and looked out at the faces in the pews. Not worship. Not fear. Not the particular kind of silence that falls over a room when people are afraid to ask the question forming in their minds. Thinking. 2,000 years of scholars, physicians, theologians, and investigators have stood where you are standing tonight. They did not all agree. They never will. But the question itself, the honest, uncomfortable, unresolved question of what happened in that chapel in southern Italy on the morning of September 20th, 1918. The question belongs to everyone. It belongs to you. So tell me. Team A. The wounds were real. The witnesses were credible. 50 years of surveillance produced zero evidence of fraud. And what happened to me belongs in the category of things science has not yet learned to measure. Team B. The letter was real. The carbolic acid was real. The Vatican's private doubts were real. And what happened to me belongs in the category of things human devotion can construct and sustain when the need is great enough.
I cannot bear this.
Team A or Team
Have
B,
mercy.
tell me why in the comments. I will read every one. The next story in this series goes somewhere you will not expect. A question the Church has never officially answered. A document that existed for centuries before anyone thought to ask what it actually meant. If you are still here, you already know you cannot stop now. And neither even now, even after everything, can I.